human condition is such that people who want to achieve more are going to end up not having that great of a balance and finding this.
Welcome to the Convene podcast. My name is Magdalina Atanassova, Digital Media Editor at Convene. Today, I'm joined by Leonard Hoops, who serves as President and CEO of Visit Indy and Tourism Tomorrow Indy. Leonard leads a team of 58 industry professionals who are charged with growing Central Indiana's nearly $6 billion convention, tourism, and event business. What impressed me is that under Leonard's leadership, Visit Indy has shattered all-time records for convention tourism sales, and Indianapolis has been named #1 convention city in America by USA Today. Leonard has also been involved with Pcma in one way or another for a significant portion of his career, and he's currently chair of Pcma's 2024 Board of Directors and Trustees. And honestly, I can keep on going. Leonard, it's a great pleasure to have you on the podcast.
Thank you for having me, Maggie, and thank you for that lovely introduction. I think the only other person who says that much about me is my mom.
That's awesome. And seriously, I could have kept going on and on. But I want to ask you, how has Pcma played a role in your career? Can you share some of the highlights?
Yeah, absolutely, Maggie. First of all, it's a great honor and privilege to be the chair of Pcma. I've been part of this industry for 30 years now, and for almost all 30 of those years, I've been a Pcma member. When I first got my first job in the industry in 1995, I was actually not familiar with Pcma. I wasn't, frankly, familiar with destination management organizations or the breadth of the convention, trade show, and meetings industry around the world. And a couple of years into that job, I attended my first convening leaders. And it was at my very first convening leaders that I realized, as people like to say, I had found my tribe. The types of people who were involved in strategizing and executing these events. And then on the business partner side, like Visit Indy. And at the time I was at the San Jose, California Convention and Visitors Bureau. It was just the sorts of people that really resonated with me. And in that almost 30 years now as a Pcma member, I've developed just so many great friendships that have unlocked everything from career development to just simply being people who I know and love and will be lifelong friends as a result of this industry. So, Pcma does three things really well, I think. It provides great content. So that, education, training, career development, all those sorts of things. But the content you get from being a Pcma member, great connections. And, so the relationships you make, the new people you're introduced to, there's really a welcomeness, I find, with Pcma versus other industry associations or different types of professional trade organizations that people just they go out of their way to want to be friendly to you and to help you advance in your career. And then the third part is commerce, and that they facilitate commerce. So whether it's me as a business event partner and the organizations I've worked for, helping to find the right customers along the way, whether it's people in their career development, therefore getting bigger jobs and more income as a result, that content, that connection, and that commerce, I think, is at the core of what Pcma delivers. And it's right up the line of what Sheriff likes to talk about, with Pcma being the platform for the business events industry, where we are moving the world forward, both socially and economically.
I like these three pillars that you put together. I feel they're very relevant. And also thinking of a career path, you need these three pillars to advance your career. So can you share a bit more about your personal career path and what led up to this appointment with Visit Indy? Because I know it's been a long road, you said already, 30 years.
Yeah, 30 years in this industry, and I was nearly 7 in the corporate world before that. So I'm older than some people realize. Many people realize I'm this old, but some don't. Like a lot of people in this industry, both on the partner and on the business strategy side, I kind of found my way to it. I'm always impressed when I meet like college students now. We have a university in downtown Indiana, University of Indianapolis, and they have a strong event management program. So I'm always meeting college-age students who plan this as a career. I did not, and I know a lot of others in the industry didn't, and then we find it and fall in love with it. I started off in college as a journalism. I have a journalism degree, a communications degree. as my undergrad and thought I wanted to be a sports writer. So I love professional sports and amateur sports. And I thought, hey, let me find a job where one day I'll get to go to a Super Bowl and an Indy 500 and a World Series and an NBA All-Star game. And while I was in college, I did some professional sports coverage. I remember going to a San Francisco Giants Major League Baseball game one time. And in the locker room afterward, I had a very unpleasant experience interviewing one of the athletes. And I thought he was just very arrogant and rude and dismissive to me. And I remember driving home that night thinking, do I really want to be a sports writer? I want to go to these events, but I don't know that I like the culture of being in this locker room and these sorts of things. So I started figuring out what could I do with that journalism degree. I wound up getting a job with a Fortune 120 company, so a fairly large global organization that was in, I think at the time they were in 16 countries and more than 50 offices globally. And I worked in their San Jose, California division, $1 billion defense division. And while I was there, they paid for my MBA, so I got a business degree after the journalism degree, and then as a reward for graduating, they offered me an extensive program where they were going to move me around the country in 3 different jobs over the next 6 to 9 years. And I was going to work in operations and finance and marketing in different divisions. And while many people, I think, would have found that very intriguing, I had not found my tribe at that point. I didn't see myself working in those types of jobs, even though it sounded intriguing. And so I'm old enough to remember that there was a day, at least in the US, where you would find jobs in the Sunday newspaper. So the Sunday paper, I don't know how it is in Europe and Asia and South America, but the Sunday paper in the US, still to this day, but back as I was early in the industry, would have almost every job you could think of would be listed in that Sunday paper. That's where people would go looking for new jobs. And there was a job for the San Jose Convention and Visitors Bureau for the director of public relations. And I thought, well, I could use this journalism undergrad, this business degree, and maybe find my way in this other industry. So I got that job. And I was the director of PR for about 2 years. And then, serendipity, the vice president of marketing job opened up and I became VP of marketing. And that's when I became very more actively involved with PCMA because I started going to Convene and understanding who the convention sales team was targeting and that sort of thing. Then a few years later, in 1999, so maybe 4 years into my journey, I ended up becoming the interim head of the sales department in addition to VP of marketing. And that interim job lasted for 2 years until I left for my next job in Sacramento. So it was a very long interim, but in those 2 years of running sales, that's when you definitely go, to the deep end of the pool with PCMA, where I was getting to meet all sorts of customers and understanding the differences between how association meetings and corporate meetings work and the different verticals within association, et cetera. But, from there, I went from San Jose to Sacramento. My wife is from Sacramento. And when I got offered a job in Sacramento to be their chief marketing officer at their Convention and Visitors Bureau, I thought that was maybe my last stop because, hey, if you're moving back to your wife's hometown, you think you're going to wind up there. But then a few years later, I got offered the opportunity to be the executive VP in San Francisco in 2006. And I was in that job until 2011. And then a recruiter called me about the Indianapolis job. And so that's how I ultimately wound up in Indy in 2011, late 2010, actually. I got called to interview for the Indy job. And there's a very specific PCMA connection to that as well, because it's a very easy date to remember. On January 11th of 2011, which is 1/11/11, PCMA was convening leaders happening in Las Vegas. And so I was in Vegas, and that's where the recruiter was having the Indianapolis people interview like a dozen candidates because they knew that a lot of the industry folks who might be interested in this job would be at PCMA in Las Vegas at convening leaders. So I was one of those dozen people that interviewed that day, and I came out lucky enough to get the job. And here I am 13 years later, still in that job. And unbelievably to me, finding myself to be the chair of PCMA's board and the foundation as well. So
I love your journey and all the serendipitous moments. And that explains why you were so good in pickleball. Your love of sports, right?
Well, it's funny, the whole pickleball thing, when Visit Seattle sent an email to me and Sheriff to invite us to do this for the foundation, I honestly really didn't want to do it, not because I didn't think I would do okay at it. I just thought it was weird to pit me against, the CEO of PCMA. It puts us in kind of an adversarial competitive role. But Sheriff was all over it. He was like, let's do it. And I said, okay. And neither one of us had ever picked up a pickleball paddle before. I mean, literally, the first time I ever hit a pickleball was about 3 hours before that match. But I'm a decent ping pong and tennis player and things like that. I have a feeling I have a little more practice with those other sports than Sheriff did.
Or just leave it at that, right? And now that you took the role of being a chair, you're also the very first chair who represents a DMO. So what does that really mean to you personally, and what kind of impact are you hoping to have on the association?
Well, when Sheriff shared that with me, and I had been thinking that this had been done because we've had chairs of DMOs for the foundation. I think of Philip Jones and Angie Rinaldi and others who have been with DMOs when the foundation was a separate entity. And then we've had chairs from other partners/suppliers, but they were all from convention centers. So Greg Odell from DC, Claire Smith from Vancouver, most recently Charles Starks from Nashville, but they're all venue folks. So when Sheriff was like, you're actually the first one from a DMO to do the association and the foundation, I was, excited that was an opportunity. I've actually had some folks from DMOs come up to me at Convening Leaders who saw me at Business Events Industry Week, who have shared with me how excited they are that the DMO space, which has obviously been a long-time partner and has a huge number of members within Pcma, but how excited they were that a DMO was in that space. I try not to read too much into it because at the same time, I don't want this to be perceived by business event strategists as, somehow or another, the DMOs are going to start kind of taking over Pcma, because we don't want that. The reality is that for Visit Indy and all our other DMOs around the world to be successful as partners in Pcma, we need and want the business event strategists to flourish and to be in these leadership roles. And so I think the door opened for me. I don't know that I opened the door, but the door opened for me as a DMO, and I think it will open for more DMOs down the road. But and it's funny because we hadn't had any DMOs, and the very next chair after me will be Neil Brownlee, and he is the DMO for Scotland, for the country of Scotland. But then after that, we've got Kelly Ricker coming in, who's our secretary treasurer now, and she works for a major medical association. And so I think you're going to see moving forward that there's going to be some balance. It's not going to be, all DMOs. It's not going to be all business event strategists. You may see another corporate person down the road. The person who opened that door years ago, Katie Quigley, when she went from the association world to Microsoft. You probably see more of that with Pcma having acquired Pcma and now, trying to kind of match what Pcma does well while maintaining the culture of Pcma. But it's a great honor to be Pcma chair, regardless of where you're from, but kind of a double honor from my perspective to be also the first from a DMO.
And you kind of alluded to, Pcma, the acquisitions, the investments that have been happening at Pcma. And there are a lot of investment projects also that happen in Indianapolis. So what excites you the most, and what should planners pay attention to?
Well, I've never been so excited about seeing a hole in the ground, but there is a big hole a block away from my office that used to be covered in small buildings and plaza. It's called Pan Am Plaza. And in 1987, Indianapolis hosted something called the Pan American Games, which was kind of the Olympics of the Western Hemisphere. But I don't know that it even exists in its current form anymore. But so that plaza since 87 has really been underutilized. It's a huge couple of square blocks in downtown Indianapolis. And it, has been used for things like when TV broadcasts cover the Super Bowl or things of that nature. They've been on that plaza, doing live shots and things like that. But when you're using a plaza like that a couple times a year, you're really underutilizing it most of the year. And so back in 2014, I really started advocating, along with our organization as a whole, that we needed to have another headquarter hotel in Indianapolis to better deliver to our customers, and particularly the Pcma world, and that we needed an expansion of our convention center. In particular, we needed more ballroom and breakout space. And after 10 years, we finally broke ground on that late last year. And then about 3 or 4 months ago, the construction equipment came in and started demolishing the buildings on that site and digging the hole. And now there's a giant hole there. And just the other day, 2 days ago, I was with half dozen folks from Hilton, their global corporate team. And they were looking at the site because that is going to be a Signia by Hilton 800-room hotel, along with a convention center expansion with a 50,000 square foot ballroom. And it'll connect right across the street to the existing convention center. And we were in the one office building on that site that will remain. And we were looking at the window at the big hole and looking at the renderings of what this project will look like. And just everybody was so excited that, we've got this recognition from USA Today that we are the #1 convention city in North America, which is a great honor. And they did, but that happened way back in 2014. Now, the good news for Indy is they've never updated that survey. So we've been #1 since 2014 with no challengers. And I hope they never do, because there's no way to go but down. But we also aren't going to rest on our laurels. And so that's just one example of some development right now, this convention center expansion in the Signia by Hilton. We're also expanding our downtown. We have a park called White River State Park that is right downtown Indianapolis. It's 250 acres, and it's expanding by another 10 to 15 acres. And it's going to have riverfront access, and it's directly across the river on the west bank of that river from the downtown convention district. That's another example of a major project. We're developing a whole bunch of things along our White River, which is the river that runs through downtown Indy. Those who might listen to this podcast who are from Europe may find this to be an absurd comparison, but I remind people all the time, because when having come from San Francisco, I used to get reminded all the time the first couple of years I was here. Hey, Indy doesn't have a Golden Gate Bridge and oceans and mountains, and it's not by the Pacific and et cetera, et cetera. It's a flat city with a river. I said, well, it's got a flat city with a river and does just fine is Paris. And there's a lot of European cities like that, right? That are basically flat cities with rivers. They don't have oceans. They don't have mountains. There's nothing geographically or topographically particularly interesting about them. But, a city like Paris has made a place for itself. They've done placemaking through culture, through building of attractions, the Louvre and the Eiffel Tower. And India is not Paris. They have a 2,000-year head start on us. But, they were founded BC. We were founded in 1820. So there's going to be a little advantage here. But I look at places like Orlando or Las Vegas. 100 years ago, Las Vegas had a population of 3,400 people. Orlando had a population of 9,400 people. Orlando was a swamp. Vegas was a desert. I look at Singapore. Singapore in 1965 was a sleepy fishing village that belonged to, or 1963, I should say, belonged to the United Kingdom. They were a colony of the United Kingdom. And you look at Singapore today, what they've done in the last 15 years at Marina Bay, building the Marina Bay Sands and Gardens by the Bay. They did that just since 2007. And so it's a reminder, going back to your original question about what am I excited about in Indy? Well, we're really being very intentional and aggressive in our placemaking. And you don't have to have oceans and mountains. You can create your own path if you have the will and desire to do it, like a Singapore or an Orlando, a Vegas, and hopefully an Indy.
That's awesome. And I loved your comparison. I mean, you don't have to have this 2,000-year head start to be a great destination, for sure.
Absolutely. I bet you Sofia, Bulgaria is beautiful. I need to come visit sometime.
Yeah, we're also kind of old city. But I don't think we compare it to India at the same time, so there you go.
We all have our strengths.
Yeah, exactly. Just switching gears a little bit, I know that you're very passionate about diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging, and you're using your voice for change. So can you share how you see accessibility becoming more of a priority in your destination?
Well, PCMA has been in the forefront of this for a long time with Ascent, and that was really meant initially to elevate women in our industry, to recognize women, to provide more opportunities, break that glass ceiling. I mean, frankly, our industry is, particularly on the business event strategy side, dominated by women, and yet women as a collective weren't getting their due. And so PCMA, worked to elevate that. That said, having been in the industry for many years, and not just working with PCMA, but with the U.S. Travel Board of Directors, with the Destinations International Board of Directors, and organizations like that, I found that DEI, or as we do it in Indy, DEIB, with the belonging, tended, in my opinion, to be almost exclusively focused on race, ethnicity, and gender, and sexual orientation, and sexual identity. And so, so it was men and women, it was black and white, it was LGBTQ. There was very little from my perspective as it related to accessibility and inclusion for those with physical and or cognitive challenges. And this is near and dear to my heart because I have a 19-year-old son with cerebral palsy. My son Cannon had a birth injury when he was born. Almost didn't make it. He was in a medically induced coma the first 10 days of his life. And today he's 19. And just yesterday on social media, I posted a photo of him holding a certificate noting that he had made the dean's list for his high school. So he's a little older than his high school classmates because we started him a little later. We weren't sure how he would fully integrate into the regular school system because a lot of kids with his condition, a cerebral palsy brain injury, a related condition, wind up either in special classes or special schools. But my boy ended up we were very fortunate. He got mainstreamed. He was able to handle it. And he's not only been able to handle it, he's been able to get on the dean's list. So one of the things that struck me, though, last week in Singapore for Pcma, I was at the Asia Pacific, the Business of Events week, and which was a wonderful conference. Pcma and Fo Chua and her team, and did just an incredible job. I feel drawing people from all over Asia Pacific. I mean, there were Australians and Kiwis, and obviously Singapore in significance, Hong Kong, some from China, and so it was really great to see that such a broad region. But while I was there, I ended up convincing my family that she go with me, pulled our kids out of school, because how often do you get a chance to have the whole family go to Singapore? So when the conferences wrapped up, we started taking the metro around Singapore, and the metro is terrific. The stations are very accessible, elevators, the trains have got spots. They're very conscientious about people with accessibility challenges using the metro. But once we got to Little India, because I'm half Indian, I'm half East Indian, I'm half English, Scottish, Irish, I had a very white dad and a very brown mom. And we wanted to go to Little India. And my mom was with us as well. And she's nearly 80 and having some mobility issues. But I found, the older part of Singapore, that like a Little India, was very difficult to get around on with my boy in his chair and my mom who's mobile but not well mobile. It was really tough to navigate those streets. And it reminds me that there's just so much work. I mean, again, like old Europe has wonderful, wonderful charms, but one of the challenges of old Europe is accessibility. The infrastructure wasn't designed for it. It's very difficult and expensive to do it. But in general, I think in our industry, we need to be thinking about everybody with differing needs. I like to call it diverse ability, right? So we have diverse abilities, and they're different, but we should be aware of what somebody in a wheelchair needs at a meeting, what somebody who's got hearing loss or vision loss has at a meeting, with somebody who's somewhere on an autism spectrum or any sort of cognitive neurodevelopment challenge. And I think we've done that I think, again, PCMA with Ascent has been at the forefront relative to the industry. But even being at the forefront relative to the industry, we're barely scratching the surface on that aspect of DEIB.
I agree with you. There's still a lot of work to be done in general. Also, just recently, I had an interview together with Jen Dienst on the Convene team with Paula Brandner on harassment and the issue of harassment in not only in the industry, but events, and how it's, how can people be more protected from different types of harassment. So really, it was very insightful conversation that we'll release soon. And it really needs to be yet another standard that we have to develop in the industry. So yeah.
I think the inclusion part, whether it's accessibility, harassment, that is kind of the part of DEIB. Well, DEI, and again, we've added B at PCMA because obviously we are a community and we want people to feel like they belong. But that I and that B in DEIB is really, I think, the next step for a lot of organizations, whether it's a Visit Indy or PCMA or any industry association.
Yeah, and you have a good opportunity now with all the developments that you're creating, and you're investing in the destination to be mindful of making them more accessible, right?
Yeah, that's built into the design of our convention center expansion and our Signia by Hilton. Certainly, when you do a new build, you have opportunities to do things with hundreds of years of knowledge of what should be done rather than what has been done.
Yeah. And there you go, the plus of being a newer destination, not 2,000-year-old.
Yeah, that's a good point. There's some advantages to being a 200-year destination rather than a 2,000-year one.
Yeah. You have started embarking on a year of strategic growth at PCMA and Visit Indy. How does it look like for you?
So the exponential growth strategy that we've talked about at PCMA back at convening leaders on stage here, Desiree talked about it, Sheriff talked about it, I talked about it. That has really been in the works since I was first on the board in 2017. So I first got on the PCMA board from 2017 to 2020. And during that term is when we started talking about, growing our membership and our engaged audience far greater than where it was, so that we could ensure the PCMA would remain the platform for the business events industry and not and go beyond just an impact. Right now we're doing a lot of talking amongst ourselves, but I think Sheriff's vision and the vision of the board and the staff at PCMA is that PCMA's influence has felt well beyond our little bubble that we exist in. That people understand the impact of events globally and how it's so vital to moving the world forward both socially and economically. And so from 17 to 20, we made progress, but we didn't get it over the finish line. Then when I was nominated to be back on the executive committee, in fact, it was Greg Odell a couple of years ago, who had been in my last year on the board, the first term, was the chair. And so Greg, I remember about a week before the deadline to file, to submit your references and fill out all these things that PCMA has to go through to get on the board. He texts me and he says, "Hey, I just nominated you for secretary treasurer." And I'm like, "That's great. I wish you'd have done that like a month ago." And now I'm scrambling for references and things. But it obviously all happened. I got back on the board, and I was surprised to learn when I got back on the board that we were still talking about exponential growth. I'm like, hey, I was on the board for 3 years. I was off for 2, and we still haven't done anything beyond talk about this. And so in the 3 years that I've been back as secretary treasurer, as chair elect, and now as chair, we did take that step, right? We got commitments from our board to move it forward. We started plotting out what that would look like. A lot of people in the industry know our good friend Oscar from MCI. He's helped us with what that should look like. Unbelievable strategic mind and research he's done, and then facilitated exploration with our board to see what that might look like. And that has ultimately led our group to say, hey, right now our collective community is a little over 8,000 people, close to 8,400 that are members. And then there's an engaged audience of somewhere between 40 and 50,000 people. What does an engaged audience mean? It means that somebody who is in some way, shape, or form touching PCMA or PCMA is touching them with education, with going to events, with online training, with certification, with subscribing to Convene, you name it. So somewhere, shape, or form, 40 to 50,000 people are engaged. We want to grow that 8,400 members to 25,000, and that 40 to 50,000 that are engaged to 300,000. And that may sound crazy, but when Oscar digs you through the data and you see globally how many people, in particular in Europe and Asia and Latin America, who are involved in some way, shape, or form in this industry and are not engaged with us, there's huge growth internationally. There's also more growth than you would expect within North America. While we have clearly the vast majority of our membership and engaged audiences in North America, there is still a lot that we've not brought into the PCMA world. So I think I'm very excited on the PCMA side that we're now in year 2 of this exponential growth strategy. Desiree got it off the ground and did a beautiful job taking it past the start line. I just think about it as a relay race. Desiree ran the first lap, handed me the baton. I'm taking the baton for the second lap. And we've got laps to go all the way to 2030. The goal is by the end of 2030, we have that 25,000 members and that 300,000 engaged community.
There's a few laps to be taken yet.
I hope that Neil and Kelly are exercising because they've got laps 3 and 4.
I'm sure they are, especially after listening to you. I'm sure they're going on the track. To be honest with you, I saw a post on LinkedIn that really stood out to me. You posted this quote from, I hope I'll pronounce it right, Steve Prefontaine.
Yeah, Steve Prefontaine was a long distance runner in the United States.
There you go. I made a reference without even knowing it. And the whole quote, for those who don't know it, is no matter how hard you train, somebody will train harder. No matter how hard you run, somebody will run harder. No matter how hard you want it, somebody will want it more. I am somebody. That speaks for me for this continued drive and determination. And I see that in your whole career and your everything that you do. But how do you find balance in this continued, race that you're running?
Yeah, that's such a great quote, right? I mean, the whole point of somebody wants it more, and then P. Fontaine said, "I am somebody." So he said that he was basically letting the world know he's the guy that was going to outwork you and outtrain you. And I think all of us need to have that attitude. If you're real, particularly in, I should take this back. We don't all have to have that attitude, but if you're willing to accept a leadership opportunity, like being the chair of PCMA or being the CEO of Visit Indy, not everybody wants to do stuff like that, but those who do ought to have that attitude, from my perspective, of being that somebody, of wanting it so much that you are the person that everybody else says, okay, I see why that person's in that role, and believe that they're going to take us forward. Balance is a tricky question. I mean, my wife, Doreen, right now, I think thinks that she's basically a single mom with 3 kids, and we only have 2 kids. So it's my 2 kids and me, because I'm gone a lot. Perfect example is the last 2 weeks. Now, the good news was in one of these weeks, they actually did go with me, but most of these trips, I'll be at IMEX in Frankfurt as the PCMA chair, and they won't be with me for that one. Most of them, they won't. So I'll be gone for another week. But like the last 2 weeks, I was at Business Events Industry Week in DC. We had the solar eclipse in Indianapolis that day at a little after 3 p.m. Eastern time zone in the US. And as soon as that eclipse had done its full totality, 15 minutes later, I was in my car driving to the airport, park at the airport, hop on a flight to DC, go to a PCMA partner dinner that night. The next morning, we had our PCMA board meeting. We have 2 board meetings generally when the PCMA board convenes. One is a more of a business meeting, and one's more of a strategic meeting. And so we had the business meeting on the Tuesday morning. That afternoon, we spent with the PCMA partners and chapter leaders. Then on the Wednesday, we had the fashion show and the destination showcase. Then on the Thursday, we had visionary awards and a second PCMA board meeting, which was the strategic meeting. Then that Friday, I flew home. I was in Indy for 2.5 hours. 1 hour I spent at the office. 1.5 hours I spent back at my condo packing my bags for Singapore with the family, and then headed to the airport again and flew to Singapore, and then flew to San Francisco that night, spent the night in San Francisco, and then that Saturday morning now, this Friday is when I left DC, Saturday morning now in San Francisco, I'm flying to Singapore. And of course, Singapore, for anybody who's made that trip, can be 16 to 18 hours, even just from the West Coast. You land in Singapore. I left at 11 a.m. on Saturday morning. I landed at about 7 o'clock at night on Sunday night. And 90 minutes after I landed, I was at a dinner with Sheriff and a couple of other colleagues from the industry, Michelle Mason, who runs ASAE, and Amy, who runs one of the industry associations as well. And I'm trying to think, there was another person or two there. Steve Johnson, who's from Destination DC, was there. Peter O'Neill from the PCMA board, who runs an association, was there. And so it was, a terrific flurry of activity, but boy, that ain't a whole lot of balance. And so the good news was, because we got there on a Sunday night and I went right to a dinner, I went right into sleep mode and really got acclimated to the 12 time zone difference pretty quickly. And then Monday, Tuesday was PCMA APAC, Business of Events. Wednesday, there was another meeting, the sheriff and I and a couple of others from that U.S. delegation. We were at a North Star meetings, Asia Pacific Conference. And then finally, Thursday, Friday, I did 2 vacation days while there. And then Saturday, we flew right home again. And then, flew home on another 16 plus hour flight, got to SFO, took a red eye to O'Hare in Chicago, took the O'Hare flight back to Indy, got home maybe 11 a.m. on the Sunday morning. And now I'm about 5 days past that, and I feel I'm back into the right time zone. But in 2 weeks, 2+ weeks, I'll be again in Frankfurt. So I would say that this is not sustainable if you did this every year. So I guess the short answer to the long answer I've given you, Maggie, to this idea of balance is, I don't know that you have it as the chair of PCMA. If you're in a full-time job like a Visit Indy, which in and of itself is easily a 60-hour a week type of job, and then you want to accept the responsibility and the opportunity and the privilege of being the PCMA chair, knowing that that's going to be another 10 to 30 hours a week. There's going to be some weeks it's 90 hours. Is that sustainable for more than a year? Probably not. Can you do that for a year? I think you can do that for a year, right? Can somebody run a marathon every day? No, but can you run a marathon if you train for it every once in a while? Of course. And so I think I can do this this unbalanced marathon for a year. But I will be and I've heard this from Charles Starks, and I've heard this from Desiree and others who have been chair of the board, that the year goes by quickly because you don't have any balance, and then you get back to your normal life.
I want to ask you something connected to that because, in the past few seasons of the Convene podcast, I've interviewed younger professionals that are just starting in the industry, and they're engaged with PCMA and other organizations in the industry. They're looking up at such opportunities, but at the same time, they're a bit more oriented to having balance in their life and to have a bit more time to be able to even digest such things happening. So do you feel that our industry, and I don't want to point fingers at PCMA or other organizations, but do you feel there is going to be change in how we do these things as running associations, because that's a voluntary position, right? You're not getting paid for 90 hours a week on top of your regular job, which is stressful enough. So do you feel there will be change coming to attract this younger generation that now is stepping into the industry?
So the easy answer to that, and it's a great question, is yes and no. Yes, in the sense that have there been some paradigm shifts culturally, particularly with the pandemic accelerating it? Because, even at Visit Indy, we were already one day a week work from home, and people could pick that day. I think pre-pandemic, we were one day a week, and it could be any day except for Monday or Friday. So it was a Tuesday, Wednesday, or Thursday. But we wanted people in on Mondays. We wanted people in on Fridays, and not turning it into a kind of a long weekend, et cetera. Well, the pandemic, of course, we were all home for 5 days a week for some time. And then when we came back out of it, there were a lot of people who supposedly it's something like, 21 days to develop a habit or something like that. Well, we all had way more than 21 days to develop this habit of working from home. And for some people, anything that was different moving forward was not acceptable to them. And others, there were others who were kind of digging in their heels and saying, I want everybody back in the office 5 days a week. I think realistically, that culturally, globally, you're looking at 1, 2, or more flexible days where you can be out of the office and still get your job done. I think, the real key is much, certainly for Visit Indy it is. And PCMA is operated with a staff that has been spread out all over the world. The headquarters in Chicago, I don't know what percentage of the overall team is in the office on a regular day, but it's not a huge percentage, right? Because you already have people that aren't based there, and then you have people who are based there who have, the ability to be more flexible twice a week. So the yes is that there has been a paradigm shift. There are people looking for balance in general. The no is that the human condition is such, and we're hundreds of thousands, if not millions of years as a species. I don't know my anthropology well enough to have the answer to that, but I know it's hundreds of thousands for sure. That the human condition is such that people who want to achieve more are going to end up not having that great of a balance and finding this, it's just the nature of the human being where it goes back to the Steve Prefontaine quote. At some point, the people who want the balance in the world, if that makes them happy, great. I'm all for that. And my team at Visit Indy, 58 people, we have a mix of people who are not looking to be working 60 hours a week. And I have no issue with that. But there are also people who are going to want to do that and who are looking to move up, and whether it's at Visit Indy or somewhere else within the industry in their career. And you can't kind of have it both ways. A lot of if there's some part of your team that is kind of putting in the extra and they want to move up, you're going to notice that as the CEO relative to somebody who is like, I'm 8 to 5 and I'm taking, I'm traveling when I want to travel, and et cetera, et cetera. You can't always have it both ways. So I fully support and want to empower those who want to have that balance, because I think that's great. And, I was reading something on Apple News recently. They have all these different articles you can get on the iPad. And one of them was about asking people where the class valedictorian had wound up, so at their high school. And I don't know if they use that same term in Europe, but basically, the top student in your school. And in many cases, that top student, went to some Ivy League college, Stanford or Harvard, Stanford not being Ivy League, but comparable. And they went on to be a doctor, or they went on to be a rocket scientist for NASA, or this, that. One of the examples that somebody wrote was their valedictorian had moved to Mexico and was selling fruit on the beach, and they were happy. So you know what? If that makes that person happy, even if they were valedictorian, more power to that person. Sell fruit on the beach. If you're living your best life that way, great. If other people felt like the only way they could live their best life was to help launch a rocket to Mars, then do that too. So that the short answer of the long answer is yes and no. Yes, there has been a paradigm shift. Yes, I think we're seeing more people with flexible work schedules, more organizations open to that as long as we get the job done. But the human condition, no, we're just wired in a way as a species that there are going to be people who are Prefontaine that are somebody, and that somebody is going to come for that next opportunity.
I like that. Was there anything we didn't address and we should have, wrapping the conversation up?
No, I've enjoyed it. This has been delightful, Maggie, chatting with you. And, it just shows you, I think about how we were just getting trained on Teams at Visit Indy in February of 2020. And video conferencing and things like that, Zoom has been around since prior to the pandemic, but it wasn't widely adopted. There was like WebEx with Cisco and some things like that.
Yeah.
It was sort of a novelty, right? So a lot of us were now. I think I should say that it was definitely a novelty in the U.S. I think internationally there are people, maybe you're an example of that were already more leaning into that because you had to. They say that necessity is the mother of invention. I think is one of those. I don't know if it's a Edison quote or somebody said that, but the gist of it is if you need something, you're going to create it. So there were people who I think, particularly in Europe and maybe Asia, who were already adopting it more extensively than the U.S. But the pandemic accelerated that, and now we get to have conversations like this where it's late afternoon in Bulgaria and it's mid morning in Indianapolis, and we're getting the chat, and then you're going to distribute this, and a whole bunch of people all over the world at their convenience, whenever they feel like listening to it, will listen to it. I will say this: I would love to hear from anybody who does listen to this. If they have any comments, feedback, questions, I put that out there on the stage at Convening Leaders, and people have definitely taken me up on it. When I was at the Business Events Industry Week, there was kind of a fireside chat at lunchtime on the Tuesday with me and Sheriff. And I put it out there to say, if I haven't met you, if you're a chapter leader, your partner, whatever it is, if I haven't met you, I would love for you to say hi. And a whole bunch of people took me up on that offer over the next couple of days and said hi, come over and said, hey, you said to say hi. So I'm saying hi, I'm Bob or I'm Mary. And I loved it. So anybody who's listening to this, I would love for them. I have a fairly simple email. It's lhoops, LHOOPS at Visit Indy, one word, visit, INDY.com. Send me an email. I would love to hear from you. Send me a connection request on LinkedIn. We're already 4 months into my year as the chair, a third of the year done, and it went by in the blink of an eye, just as Charles and Desiree and other Greg Odell and Claire Smith have all told me that it will go by in a blink of an eye. So I guess that's the only thing I would add is that I would love to hear from others who do listen to this with your feedback, your comments. Would love to meet you. Would love to know about your PCMA journey. And I appreciate anybody who has listened to this because that means they are part of this engaged community, whether you're a member or not a member, that we are looking to grow to be so impactful that we're really going to make a difference in the world.
Yeah, thank you. I think you have such an inspiring story, and the fact that you're so open to listening to others and help them on their journey, I think it's very important, especially for the younger generation that are looking up to people like yourself. So I hope they will be the ones that will take you up on your offer and will shoot an email, connect on social media with you, and ask for your advice and help them grow, because we need more young people in our industry.
Well, and I think that I was born into a situation, you can't choose your circumstances as you come into this world. And in my particular case, I had an English, Scottish, Irish from an ethnicity, American father from a nationality, and this East Indian mother from an ethnicity born in Trinidad from a nationality. And so I joked to Sheriff, when he was like, hey, you're the first DMO person to be the chair. I said, I'm pretty sure I'm the first DMO. I'm the first person born in Trinidad to be the chair. I'm probably also the first English, Scottish, Irish, Indian American to be chair, right? Because the circumstances are such. But that growing up as a kid who didn't look like other kids, it opened my eyes and ears to different stories and different perspectives. And I probably grown up. Americans, in my opinion, as a whole, are often, we get a little nationalistic, and we're not as our eyes and ears are not as open to the planet as we should be. I think I mean, criticism of myself as an American, collectively as a group. Plenty, great people who are well traveled and know the world, but as a whole, we're not. We don't know geography very well. We don't know how other cultures do things well. And so it's such a blessing and a privilege in this PCMA chair role. When I was in my San Francisco job, I had a dozen or 13, I can't remember the exact number, international offices. We had offices in Beijing and Shanghai and Seoul and Tokyo and Paris and Rome and Sydney. And so, I had opportunities in that job to travel the world. And one morning you're in Seoul saying, "Annyeonghaseyo," and you try to learn, maybe 20 phrases. And then the next morning you're in Beijing or Shanghai, "Ni hao." Then the next morning you're in Tokyo and it's "Ohio gozaimasu." And, and you realize that even within Asian cultures, we kind of lump them together. And you're like, Seoul is so different. And South Korea is so different than that. Heck, Beijing and Shanghai could not be any different, right? I mean, the capital of China and kind of its Las Vegas of China could not be any more different than the two cities could be. And, so you get these global experiences. And I think PCMA helps facilitate and or accelerate that if you're one of those somebodies that Prefontaine talks about. That, if you want that opportunity, PCMA is definitely a pathway to help you find those opportunities to become a global person. And, you can be proud of your own ethnicity and your own nationality, but we're all, at the end of the day, citizens of this earth.
Yeah, well said. Let's wrap with that because that was a great end to this conversation. Thank you so much for making the time. I really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me, Maggie. It's a great pleasure and honor. Thanks.
Thank you. If you enjoyed this episode, do give us a 5-star review and subscribe wherever you listen to podcasts. For more industry insights, visit pcma.org/convene. Until next time.